Hello, this is Kristofarova. Welcome to another episode of the Strategy Skills podcast. Our podcast sponsor today is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is a free download. Go to firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And if you're currently updating your resume, you can get McKinsey and BCG winning resume. It is a resume that got offers from both of those firms, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. And today we are speaking with Mark Shrime. Mark is the International Chief Medical Officer at Mercy Ships and the lecturer in global health and social medicine at the Harvard Medical School. Mark also competed on seasons 8, 9, and 11 of American Ninja Warrior. Such an unusual background. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Mark, so you graduated summa cum laude from Princeton in 96 and had an incredible career. Maybe we could start with you giving us a brief overview of your journey from that point.
Well, sure. Very happy to. You've now dated me for all your listeners. Yes, I graduated college in 96 with a biology degree. Which I got into mostly because I kind of had to. I am the firstborn son of an immigrant family, and often for children of immigrant families, as many of your listeners will know, it sometimes feels like we've got three options, right? Doctor, lawyer, or failure. So I went to college to get a biology degree and then went on to medical school. Went to medical school and honestly did not like it because it was not what I had wanted to do. So the path that I've taken over the last 25 years or so since then, 28 years or so since then, has been a little bit convoluted. So I did medical school. I did a residency in ear, nose, and throat, and then did some fellowships in surgery for tumors of the head and neck region, and then reconstructive surgery. And the entire time kept really trying to quit that, kept trying to get off of the road of medicine. In 2008, I had finished my first fellowship and was moving on to a second fellowship in reconstructive surgery. And I took a year off in between those two fellowships. Spent 6 months of that year just traveling, just being a consumer, basically.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but a quick question. Was it something your parents approved? Because I know what it is like. So I am also firstborn.
Yeah,
I didn't really had as much pressure from parents to succeed, but there was a lot of pressure just generally because you're firstborn, having responsibility for everyone in the family. I think they just did not thought that I could do many of the things I ended up doing with my career. Otherwise, I probably would have had the pressure that you had. But I'm just wondering, how did they reacted to you taking a year off? Because that is an unusually brave decision.
Yeah, so it was actually my second year off. After my first year of medical school, I got into medical school, and as I said, I hated it a lot. So I took a year off already after my first year of medical school, moved to Singapore, had a 1-year contract teaching chemistry in Singapore. So my family was probably not as surprised, I think, with the second time around. I will tell you, though, who was really surprised and who really counseled against it were my mentors in fellowship. As I was considering this and kind of starting to talk about it, basically every single one of them told me that I shouldn't take this year off because it would make my CV look bad. People would think I wasn't serious about being a surgeon. People would hire me with a lot more trepidation because maybe he's going to take another year off. What was really interesting to me, though, was despite all that, I finally decided, I'm going to do it anyway. After I decided, basically every one of them, to a man, they were all men, every one of them to a man, pulled me aside and said, gosh, I wish I had done that before the mortgage, the children, the practice, whatever. I wish I had taken the time to take a year off. Now, this was 2007 when I was making this decision, 6, 7 when I was making this decision. I know, speaking to medical students and residents these days, there's a little bit more of an acceptance of taking a gap year, taking some time to do something else. Interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, a lot of that time is spent taking a year doing research. So you're still kind of on the path. There's a little bit more acceptance of that. But yeah, back when I was doing it, this was not a thing that you did, because it threatened to quote unquote ruin your career. And the really interesting thing is that it did. It didn't ruin my career, but it completely shifted the direction of my career. It was in that year off that I spent 6 months working as a surgeon in Liberia on a hospital ship, on Mercy ships, my first time there. And it was then that the very first time I walked down into the hospital on that hospital ship, and I saw all these patients with these tumors that I had been learning how to take care of. That was when I finally had that epiphany moment of, oh my gosh, this is what I have been training to do for 15 years, and I didn't even know it. So that year off, although it didn't ruin my career, as I said, it really shifted it. That's when I knew that, it took 10 years between that epiphany moment and the time that I finally committed to it. But that's when I knew that I had to commit my career towards this goal of surgical delivery in resource constrained settings.
I'm glad that I asked. So you're taking a year off. What happens after that?
So I had this epiphany moment that I said, I walked down the stairs. I'm like, this is what I've been training for the last 15 years. And you would think that because of that, I would change my life. But I'm not very brave. So instead of finding a way to stay there, instead of finding a way to just sort of dig into this, commit to this, I went back to the safety of what I had been doing before. I went back, finished my second fellowship, got my first job as a full-time physician in the Boston area, and that was, I was dissatisfied with that, and I was dissatisfied because for the 15 years of my training in medicine, I kept hearing, "Stick it out. Yes, it's hard right now, but it gets better." And it's true. Like, honestly, being an attending, being a physician, fully fledged physician, way better than being a resident. It's true. It is much better. But I found myself at better. I'd gotten to better. And I was like, this is not what I signed up for. That is not what I thought it was going to be. It's not what I want to do. So gradually, I went back to school, got a master's in public health, and then continued and got a PhD in health policy with a focus on decision sciences. And all of that was building up to me. Like, my dissertation and my PhD was all about delivering surgery in resource constrained settings. Like, all of it was building up to this idea that this is the direction that I wanted my career to go. I was still seeing patients. I saw patients all the way up until 2018. And yeah, one of the scariest decisions I think I've ever made is shutting down my US practice and deciding that really this is where I wanted to focus my life. Was on this.
So what happens after you shut down your US practice?
Well, that was 2018. I at that point had accepted a sabbatical, a research faculty sabbatical at Princeton, and was in the middle of that when the pandemic happened. So my whole next part of my career was supposed to, the pandemic messed all of that up. Finished off that sabbatical in the middle of uncertain, it was 2020 right at that point. Got a job for 2 years as the chair of a department in global surgery, which is what we've now been calling this idea of surgery in resource constrained settings. Got a chair appointment at a university in Dublin. Did that for 2 years, and then in 2022 took on the position I have now, which is as the chief medical officer for Mercy Ships, for this organization that I first started volunteering with back in 2008. And that's what I've been doing since then. I still operate 2.5 to 3 months a year on the ships, and then the rest of my time is spent as the CMO, doing sort of the admin that a chief medical officer does.
And how you ended up taking part in American Ninja Warrior?
Well, that is a whole other story. This is 2016, I think. It was one of those nights where like can't sleep, so you're up, you're watching YouTube videos, and I started watching videos of Ninja Warrior. I had probably about 3 or 4 years before that gotten into rock climbing, really enjoyed rock climbing. So I started watching these Ninja Warrior videos, and right, all of the best decisions in your life happen at 2 in the morning. So at 2 in the morning, I was like, I can do this. This looks easy. I figured, I'd been climbing for a while. I had decent upper body strength. So on a whim, I just applied. And I kind of forgot about it. I was like, there is no way they're going to take a 41-year-old dorky surgeon from Boston onto this show. Like, I am not who they take onto this show. So I forgot about it. They give you about a 3-week notice before you go on the show. So about 3 weeks before I was supposed to film, they called me and said that I've been accepted to go onto the show. At this point, I had not trained at all for this. So I said yes, and then immediately Googled Ninja Warrior training in Boston. And I found there are a bunch of gyms. So I went to my first gym, again, 3 weeks before I'm supposed to go on national television. And had, again, still that sort of same hubris of I'm decently strong. I've got the upper body strength. I should be fine. So I went to a Ninja Warrior gym and I could not do a single obstacle. But that sparked a kind of a fire, a desire in me. Ninja Warrior is one of these things where it forces you to become very comfortable with failing, very comfortable with just messing up, being mediocre. It's a very, very difficult sport, and the way it's set up. I don't know if any of your audience have watched it. The minute you fall, you're done. Like, there is no getting back up. If you fall the first obstacle, you've been on the course for 9 seconds. That's it. You're done. So, which is a very different approach to how most of us, are able to live our lives. But yeah, like I fell in love with both the physicality of it, but also fell in love with the mental aspect of it. The fact that it was forcing me to confront this fear of failing, all these fears and anxieties that had built up over my life. So I got into it. I stayed in it until 2021. I had a fairly bad injury falling off of an obstacle, and I didn't know at the time, but it really, like, I will probably never compete again. I still do it, kind of still dabble in it, but yeah, it was one of those career-ending injuries. I am 50 at this point, and the people that do well in this sport are 19. So still, I love it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
I'm so sorry to hear about the injury.
It's okay. Yeah, it happens. It happens. It's one of these risky sports, so it's not going into it that you risk these sorts of injuries. What
was the biggest difference in terms of practicing, preparing, training versus actually performing?
For Ninja Warrior?
Yes.
I've never been asked that question before. I think so. When you are at a competition, whether it's the nationally televised one, or there are now some Ninja Warrior leagues, it's become a sport. So there are competitions, national competitions that aren't part of the TV show. You generally don't have a preview of the course that you're going to run until at the earliest the night before, and often it's just the day of, which is very different in many ways from any other sport. So when you go to a gym to practice, you also don't know how the gym's going to be set up that day, but you can get there and you can build yourself up to whatever thing that you're working on. So you can make baby steps, you can do progressions into the thing that you're trying to get. When it's time to compete, you've just got to do it. There is no second chance. There is no practicing on it. There is no getting the nerves out. You have to stand on that starting block with all the nerves. And then you've got to throw your body in a way that might actually hurt you. Right. And because if you've been in the sport long enough, you've seen people get injured. And I think that's the hardest thing. You don't have the baby steps that you can take when you're practicing. You're facing this complete unknown that you were not prepared for, and you've got to rely on the skills that you have built to actually achieve that. Very different approach. That makes sense.
Marken, did you notice that people started perceiving you differently once you started competing? Because prior to that, you were the serious person, amazing career, surgeon, and then something different.
Yes. And to be frank, I started perceiving myself differently. I was not athletic growing up. Really, like, not at all. I was the opposite of athletic. If I had to, like, my parents had to force me to go outside. And my career path is the sort of career path that you would expect for somebody who was like that, right? I mean, becoming a doctor, I'm the firstborn, I'm an introvert, all those sorts of things. So becoming a doctor was kind of, it made sense. Ninja Warrior did not make sense. There's no reason that I, as this like shy, dorky introvert, would ever put myself in this position. So, I mean, yes, like, my Instagram became a lot more exciting because I put up these crazy things, but also the way that I spoke, the way that I carried myself, it gave me a confidence that nothing in my life before or since has given me, of like, you know what, A, whatever you throw at me, I'm going to try it. And B, even if I mess up, like, it's okay. I'm going to get back up again. So yeah, I mean, I think probably people perceive me differently. I definitely perceived me differently. I had to shed, still deep inside, I'm that dorky, introverted, nerdy child that never wanted to go outside. But I realized that wasn't who I had to remain, and I could change that.
It's so interesting that it changed you even more than it changed the way people see you.
I'd say so. It definitely changed me. Like, it was a very, very, what's the word, substantial part of my life. Even though it's over now, it changed a lot with me.
Do you feel that it changed the way you look at life?
I'd say so. It's so weird to talk about Ninja Warrior in this kind of existential way. But I also know that if you talk to just about any one of us who's been in this position, we will say the same thing. It did. It changed the way I looked at life. It changed the notion of fixedness. That, your life is a sort of, it's a predetermined path that you live from the time that you graduate high school to the time that you retire. It started to call some of that into question. Really gave me there's this somewhat cliched phrase or definition of courage, that courage is not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. And I kind of knew that, like, intellectually up in my brain, but it really made that incarnate. It really made that a physical thing that, and I think it, as a result, it spilled over into other aspects of life. It spilled over into the way that I approach my career. It spilled over into the way that I, approach big decisions in my life. It gives you this confidence, as I said before, that even if you mess up, even if you fall down, even if you completely destroy your knee, you still can get up and, start again. And that's something that I didn't have before Ninja Warrior.
Do you feel that it somehow impacted your view on how you need to basically carry on your mission? So you recently wrote a book, and it's all about why. So we need to understand the why we're here, what we're doing. And then once we know the why, at least in my experience for myself, I know I have this big mission. And so I'm wondering how all those realizations and experiences related to competing and doing something very different from what you've done before. And I guess you got some of it from rock climbing as well, because that was also somewhat different, but not as extreme. I wonder how it impacted how you approach, how you think about your why and what you do about it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So so I did write a book a couple of years ago called Solving for Why, and it is all about exactly this. That there's a fairly famous quote from Viktor Frankl, and he says, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And inside that quote, there's an implied hierarchy that the why comes first and the how is secondary. Figure out your why, and then you can bear whatever how is thrown at you. Figure out your purpose, and then construct the path to meet that purpose. Again, one of those things that I kind of knew intellectually. If you read on sports psychology, which, my gosh, 16-year-old me would never have thought that I would be talking about. If you read on sports psychology and you read on anxiety in sport and performance anxiety, one of the most common tools that people use, or people tell you to use, is to formulate and keep the why at the center. So why is it that I am standing on this platform about to jump 8 feet, 16 feet off the ground, and I might miss? Like, why am I doing this to myself? Because it's crazy, right? It's a crazy idea. And so either you can sit there, and very often that did happen. I would stand on these platforms and be like, why am I doing this to myself? But either you can sit there and be like, why am I doing this? Or you can actually figure out what's the why. And then that changes the approach you take to the obstacles, approach you take to the course. And I think that really, let me back up. Even the idea of writing a book, I never thought I would write a book. Ever thought I would write a book. And in the middle of writing it, I was like, nobody's gonna want to read this. But it was again the idea that no, there's a message here that I want to write. I don't care if one person reads it, but I have this drive that I want to get this message out, and I can risk it, right? I can risk the book failing. I can risk all of these things because I'm driven by this why. And all of that, right? It changed the approach that I have also, as I said, to career decisions and to personal decisions. That fundamentally, I need to be able to express what that why is, and then create a path to get there. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I maintain a journaling practice, and I journal every day. And at the start of every journal, which is usually about every 3 or 4 months, at the start of every journal, I repeat the same sections to begin with. I don't retranscribe them, but every journal starts with a section on why, and I write out, like in ink on paper, the why for my career, the why for sport, and the why for relationships. And going through that exercise every 3 or 4 months really helps me crystallize, all right, why am I doing my work, whatever it is? Why am I doing my work for these next 3 or 4 months? What am I trying to achieve? It also allows that why to evolve, right? And the why from 5 years ago when I first started this practice for work is not the same as the why today. Similar, but it has changed a little bit. And it allows me to sort of keep my finger on my own sort of internal drive.
I have a great quote on why. I will read it quickly here. Here's the thing. We can find 1,000 quiet, numerous moments. We can have all the epiphanies in the world, and we can still stagnate. Solving for why means more than just articulating it. It means deciding. Do you remember that moment, that defining moment of articulating your life's biggest question, why? So you mentioned that it was the moment earlier today, but maybe we can elaborate, because I think it's so important, and it may help our listeners to also identify how can they manufacture that moment for themselves.
Yeah, so I think there are there are really kind of three phases in manufacturing, or sort of in finding your own why. The first is a lot of what we've been talking about so far. The fact is that a lot of us, myself included, often find ourselves with our hierarchy reversed. So instead of the hierarchy in Viktor Frankl's quote, and instead of the why being first and the how being secondary, we find ourselves on a path. And then we're trying to, like, in the Sunday scaries, shoehorn our purpose to sort of fit that path. So we've flipped that hierarchy for whatever reason. And one of the reasons that we do that is because changing your path is scary. Changing your path throws you face first into failure, into messing up. This is one of the things that Ninja Warrior really, really taught me. So I think the very first phase for anybody who's trying to articulate what their why is and design their life around it is not even to articulate what the why is and design your life around it. It's to do something, whether it's Ninja Warrior or cross stitching or, crossword puzzles, whatever. Do something you're terrible at, and do something that will keep you in this position of being a beginner. We're so driven by outcomes and by the hope of results, as Thomas Merton says. And so, I don't know, we start doing crosswords and we're like, why am I terrible at crosswords? I need to be good at it for me to enjoy it. There is a practice to being a beginner. There is a practice to being terrible at something. And I think that's the first step before you do anything else, before you try to articulate your why. Just get to a place where you're comfortable with, and even you start to love that feeling of being not good at something. Then the next step is the realization that you can't, I'm going to take a little bit of an issue with the word that you used. You can't manufacture your why, right? You don't, maybe you do. Most people don't find their why.
Just to clarify, I did not mean manufacturing why. I mean, well, I think it's not the best word to begin with that came to mind, but I was talking about creating basically a situation, a moment.
Yes, 100%. There, I 100% agree. Because why doesn't come from the usual places, right? You can't read the data on surgery in low-income countries and be like, there's my why. You don't find your why in the data, in the numbers, and even in the stories. I truly believe that our why is hidden in those really quiet, numinous moments that exist in our lives if we're willing to listen. And I think the manufacture here is manufacturing the space to listen. The theologian Marcus Borg talks about the idea of thin spaces, the spaces where what is real, the veil between what's real and what's not gets a little bit thinner. Like you're a little bit closer to God, however God is defined. You're a little bit closer to that. And it's, for some people it is church. For some people it's a Taylor Swift concert. For some people it's, it's a rock climbing wall. You've got to find those places where your soul is just a little bit transported and listen, because it's in those quiet moments that I think we find our why. And then the third, so you've got the first phase of like getting ready for the fact that finding your why is going to mess things up for you. And then it's manufacturing that space for that why to come to you. But then it's to that quote that you read from the book. You can do that a dozen times, right? You can have a dozen epiphanies, and you could write out what your why is every 3 months in your journal. At some point, you got to make a decision to act on that. To use another quote, this is from Morpheus in The Matrix. He says there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. So you can know your why, you can articulate it, but at some point, you're going to have to make some scary decisions to shift your path so that it aligns with your why. I could talk a lot more about that, but I think those are the three phases that everyone goes through. Is first of all, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Then it is, those quiet spaces. And then it's the hard decisions. Then it's the the actual act of solving for how do I create my path to take me towards that purpose.
So continue with this thought of deciding, making decisions. In your studies, you specifically focused at some point on decision making. What could you share with our listeners on some of the things they can incorporate from what you learned to help them make better decisions in that moment when they figured out what their why is, but next step is deciding, okay, what I'm going to do differently now?
Yes. So the majority, about 80% of the population, is what we call risk averse, right? So we don't like risk. I am risk averse. I'm part of the 80%. I don't like risk. Back in probably it was 2010 or so, 11. I tell the story in the book. I was in a conversation with a mentor of mine, a surgeon on the hospital ships. His name is Gary Parker. And we're in those conversations between friends and we talk about politics and religion and relationships. And in the middle of it, I asked him, how does he make big decisions in his life? Because he has lived and worked on a hospital ship for nearly 40 years. That is a big decision to have made in your life. Met his wife, raised his kids, like that's a huge decision. So I asked him, how do you make these sorts of decisions? And he told me that when he is sitting at a threshold trying to kind of decide what the next step is, he looks 30 years down the line at the best possible outcome of each of his decisions, each of his choices. And if one of the best possible outcomes just kind of makes him shrug his shoulders, then it's not the right choice for him. Now, the PhD that I have is a PhD in the science of decision making. So this Gary Parker rule has an official name. It's called the Maximax criterion for decision making under uncertainty. And what that criterion is exactly this. If you are trying to decide, you want to make these decisions around your why, you look at the best possible outcome for all of your choices, and then you choose the best of the best. Now, this is an incredibly risky decision-making strategy. Most of us are not maxi-max decision makers. Most of us are maxi-min decision makers. We look for the worst possible outcome. If I fail, what's the worst that can happen? And then we try to cushion that worst. So we pick the least bad of the failures. Very opposite, very much in contradistinction to this maxi-max decision making. The thing is, to create a life around your why, you've got to take these big risks because it's gonna kind of kick you off the path that you have been on. And we don't take these big risks if all we're thinking about is how to cushion the fall in case it doesn't work. So that's what I counsel clients to do. So I have this in the book also, that if you want to make a choice around this, you want to construct a life that leads you towards your purpose, you got to risk. You've got to risk making these maxi-max decisions. What's the best that could happen? And then pick the best of the best instead of being scared of what's the worst thing.
Interesting. Do you have any other techniques you could share? Because I'm sure this maxi-max things, and I have studied a lot, but I never heard about it. Any other thoughts that come to mind that could be helpful for people?
Yeah. So let me start by saying that I love the science of decision making. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And we have all sorts of super cool mathematical ways of looking at decision making. Fundamentally, a decision is an emotional one. Most people, the vast majority of people, make decisions emotionally and then go back and justify the decision, kind of fill it in afterwards. So I think here's what I'm going to say about this. You should, and I still do it, and I will continue to do it for the rest of my life. Do this Gary Parker exercise of, find the best possible outcome, choose the best of the best. But it's still scary, right? It still terrifies me. It terrified me when I made the choice to close my practice, terrified me when I moved to Ireland, terrified me when I took this particular job. And actually, as I was debating one of those moves, I had done the work. I had done the math. I had I figured out what the best possible outcome was, and I still couldn't bring myself to make that decision. And I was talking to another friend of mine, and he gave me another piece of advice that I've started to use a lot, which is, do all that work, do all the figuring out, the looking forward 30 years, but then you've got to try the decision on. He used the phrase, live as if. So, I was choosing whether I wanted to move to Ireland. And he's like, spend 5 days, live as if you've already decided that you're moving to Ireland. Start telling people that, start acting like it, and just see how it feels. See how that shirt fits. And then spend 5 days as if I was debating with another job, as if you have chosen that job, and see how that shirt fits. Because yes, we can do all the intellectual work that's necessary to make wise decisions. We've also got to do the emotional work of does it feel freeing to me? Does it feel right? All those sorts of things for me to make this scary, risky decision. Because if it fails, and decisions do fail, if you have this deep existential failure, you need to know that not only have you done the mathematical work and all that, you need to know that this was a decision that you were diving into. It's the same thing going back to Ninja Warrior. The minute you jump off that platform, you need to be comfortable that, yes, I have decided to jump off this platform. I am doing this. So it's the intellectual work, and it's also sort of the emotional work.
It is very, very helpful thing. I actually do it when I make decisions. I also pretend that I decided and see how I feel, because often intuitively you start getting additional guidance on if it's the right path or not.
Yeah, it's insane how powerful that exercise is. The first time I did it again with this Ireland decision, it just became it was almost like the decision. It was almost like it became obvious. That this was, even putting on the shirt of the other job that I was considering at the time, just didn't feel right. So I don't know honestly don't know how our brains work in that particular way, but yeah, it's a very powerful tool.
Mark, you up to now had very successful career and will continue having a very successful career, no doubt. Do you feel there are some habits that you develop, intentionally or not, that played a key part in that success?
Yes. I'm going to talk about two of them. I've already mentioned one, which is I maintain a journaling practice. I do what was popular maybe 5 years ago. People talk about it less now, but I still do a bullet journal. So the bullet journal is the idea that it's basically a glorified task list, as it was first imagined. And I do that task list portion of it. I think it's very important. One of the things that it does for me is that it is a brain dump. I can't keep all the things I have to do in my head, because then I just get all stressed out. So I dump it onto a sheet of paper, and then I can gradually sort of get through it. So there's a practical aspect of bullet journaling, but also so every day for me has a page. The top half of the page is the bullets. The bottom half is a journal. Is just a practice of writing down every day what you have done, what you have been through, what you're feeling, all of these sorts of things. I also, because I like data, put a scale of 1 to 10 kind of emotional gauge on the day before. And that has actually given me a lot of insight. I can plot that against certain things and be like, okay, well, this practice really drains me, or this really, gives me life. So putting all that stuff down I think has been very, very important for me, both the qualitative and the quantitative stuff of it. The other practice is the other practice is reading. A lot of my friends are like, gosh, why or how do you read so much? I have no time to read. I'm so busy. I have always got 2 books on the go. I've always got a nonfiction book and a fiction book on the go. And they both kind of expand your mind in different ways. Nonfiction books also obviously give you kind of data, information. Fiction gives you information in a whole different way. It allows you the empathy to step into somebody else's shoes. And I hate to say it, but unfortunately, I think this day and age, empathy is one of the things that we're lacking a lot of. So yeah, like I wake up early. I wake up between 5 and 5:30 most mornings, so that I can have the journaling practice, so that I can do some reading. I also try very hard to keep the morning free. That allows me to have that time to think, to write, to plan, to think about the next decision before I'm into my emails and my meetings and all that sort of stuff. I'd say those are the two practices that have probably been the most sustained in my life and the most transformative.
For someone listening to us now and thinking, you know what, I should try journaling, what would you recommend they include? What are the components that would you recommend they include?
I can tell you what I include. I don't know that there's a recommendation for what one should include. The one thing I will say, and other people who journal say this also, write every day. It doesn't matter if it's one sentence. Yesterday sucked. That's a journal entry. Like, it does not matter. Write something every day. Again, sort of what I include. So I told you I have each day is a page, and there's sort of two halves to the page. There's the like things I would need to get done that day. And then there's the qualitative journaling aspect of it. There's one thing that I didn't say is that the top right corner of every page is a gratitude corner. I write every day something that I was grateful for from the day before. Often it's stuff that I really like. Often that gratitude corner is fairly easy to fill in. But there are some mornings where I'm like, wow, yesterday was just so terrible. Like, I am just grateful that I don't know, like, ticked off all the boxes I had to do. Like, sometimes it's, but taking 20 seconds in the morning to look back on the day before and say, as bad as it was, there was one shining light in it, has been also a very steadying practice. I say it as if it's magical and transformative. There are so many days I get to that gratitude corner and I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't have anything to put in here. But forcing yourself to do it, I think is really good.
And do you write it by hand?
I do write it by hand. I do. I carry my notebook with me basically everywhere I go. I know a lot of people do it electronically, and for a long time I maintained my journal as a Word document. But the practice of not turning on your computer quite yet, the practice of sitting with your coffee or your tea or whatever in the morning and writing this down by hand, it literally activates a different part of your brain, but it also keeps you away from the distraction of your email or the Teams message or Slack message that is waiting for you when you turn on your computer.
Do you also review your week in your journal, or do you have different time management and planning set up? But journaling is more about what's happening in your life, what you're grateful for, kind of keeping track of what's happening, but not planning as much other than the bullets.
Yeah, there's not as much planning. I have actually been worse at this job than I was at my last job at time blocking. I'm a huge believer in time blocking, and also I've not been doing it very well. But I did say a little bit that I try to keep, the morning, like, I try not to take meetings before like 9:30 or 10 in the morning, because that's when I personally do my best thinking. It really depends on, everyone's different, but the deepest work that I can do happens before 10 in the morning. And if I can come away with a morning where I have written 2,000 words or read something, done a little bit of the deep work, then when I dive into the meetings and the emails and the admin work that I have to do, I kind of can dive into it almost fresh without feeling like there's stuff that I haven't done. It's also, I think any manager, any executive will say that leadership management is like a gas. It will expand to fill whatever space you give it. So it's super important to give it the space that you can give it and no more. I like, when I put blocks in my calendar, those blocks are in my calendar, and I will not actually accept meetings that come into those blocks. That is hard to do because you end up, people end up getting annoyed because you're not available, this particular time or that particular time. But if it's very easy to get captured by the allure of the urgent. And that urgent will fill up any space that you give it, not leaving you the time to do the stuff that you really want to be doing, really need to be doing.
Mark, and in terms of selecting books, how do you select books to read?
Usually it's on people's recommendations, honestly. I use my Amazon cart as my to be read list, and there's something like 50 books in that Amazon cart right now. So a very good friend of mine who used to work for Mercy Ships and now is moved on to a different job. He and I send each other sort of the leadership books. Very often the leadership books that are in my Amazon cart are books that he has sent me that he's just finished reading. So it's a lot of, for the nonfiction books, it's a lot of recommendations from other people. For the fiction, honestly, it's what's the word? It's the sorting algorithm that Amazon and Goodreads and all of them have. Oh, you liked this one, you might like this one. Often that's how I pick the next one.
Mark, is there something that you wish I asked you and I didn't, or something very important you want to leave our listeners with?
There's something that I wish you had asked that you didn't. But I do want to just kind of go back to this idea of these three phases in constructing a life around your why. Because I think A, they're very important, but B, I recognize that, so for example, I don't have kids. So for me to decide to shut down my practice and work as a surgeon in resource constrained settings was a lot easier because I am not trying to save up for my kids' education, for example. So I recognize that some of the things that I've been saying come from the privilege I have because of some of the decisions that I have made. That has to be acknowledged. And so I've been in the position where I can say, listen, this is my why, and I want to pursue it whole hog. On the flip side, one's why does not have to come from career. And I think that's a really important distinction. When I left full-time practice in 2011, my partner, the guy that I operated with, the guy that hired me into my job, love the guy. He's an incredible surgeon, really good friend, but at the time didn't quite get what I was doing because for him, he has a family. He being the best possible surgeon and providing the best possible life for his family. Those were his why. So what I'm trying to say here is that everybody's why is different. You don't have to find your why on a hospital ship in West Africa. Your why may be standing right in front of you, and your why may be time dependent. As an example, let's say that you're caring for an aging parent, for example. Well, that is the position that you are, and that may be your why right now, and that may change in 5 or 10 years, and that is also okay. So it's easy to sort of sit here and say, well, your why has to be this, this amazing thing working as a surgeon on hospital ships or whatever, but it doesn't. Everyone's why is valid, everyone's why is different, and everyone's why is deeply rooted in where they are in their story.
Very true. You have to listen to your own voice. No one can tell it.
Yeah.
And no one should be able to judge it. It is not their why. So they don't need to understand it, and you don't need their understanding.
Absolutely. Fully agree. Yeah.
Mark, where can our listeners learn more about you, buy your book, anything you want to share?
Yeah, thanks. So the book is called Solving for Why. It's available wherever books are sold. It's been out for a couple of years. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. You can find me on my website, which is markshrime.com. It's SHRIME.com. And then I'm on Twitter and Instagram, also with the same handle, Mark Shrime.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Such an incredible conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
Thank you, everyone, again for tuning in. Our guest today again has been Mark Shrime. Check out his book. It is called Solving for Why. And our podcast sponsor today is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is a free download. Go to firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And if you're currently updating your resume, you can get McKinsey and BCG winning resume, which is a resume that got offers from both firms. And you can get it as a free download at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. And Firms Consulting is FIRMSconsulting.com. Thank you very much again, everyone, for tuning in. Mark, thank you. And I will see you all next time.